Hey guys, welcome back to Willpower Garage. Today we're working on a 2014 Volkswagen Beetle with a 1.8 liter Generation 3 engine, and I'm going to show you how to replace the rear main seal. Stay tuned. Okay guys, so obviously to get to the rear main seal, you either need to remove the engine or the transmission. And as you can see, there's quite a bit in the way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the transmission. It's a lot easier. There's less wiring, less fluids. But I'm going to start here on the top. I'm not going to go so into depth on removing the transmission as much as I just want to show you the proper way to install the rear main seal. Because if you install it wrong, it will leak and you'll get misfire codes, you'll have oil leaks from other places in the engine. So I'm going to make it sort of a brief description of how we remove everything. Don't worry, I'll mention the torque specifications that you guys are going to need when you put things back together. And if anything's important, I'll definitely show you guys the manual of, special torque sequences and stuff like that. But the short explanation, at least from the top here, is we're going to remove the air box, the cold air intake here. We're going to remove the battery tray. Basically, we need to get access to the top of the transmission. The other thing is we're going to need a way to support the engine, because once the transmission is out, the other side of the engine mount is the transmission. So I have an engine bar that I normally use to support these engines. But on the later generation Beetle, there is not really a support to hold the engine up. So I might need to get creative. Something simple. I was thinking just a piece of wood, just to bridge the strut tower to the front core support, just so I could put my engine bar across to pick up on this point here so we can hold the engine up to remove the transmission. But that's basically it from up here. Let's go below and I'll show you guys what we need to remove from below. All right guys, so looking underneath here, obviously we're going to have to remove the axle shafts. Usually what I do is I'll disconnect the lower ball joint here so I can get the axle out without having to take everything else apart. Obviously from both sides off the transmission. This hole right here is where we're going to get to the torque converter bolts, which we're going to have to remove to get the transmission out. And then we have a couple of electrical connections here and the starter. There's a few other things up top. I'll show you once we're up there and have that apart. But again, I'm just giving you guys the gist of what we need to remove because I want to more show you how to replace the seal on the engine, not necessarily how to get the transmission out. Transmission is basically nuts and bolts. If you're going to attempt replacing your rear main seal, you should be able to know how to find whatever hardware you need. But yeah, like I said, we're going to start from the top. I'm going to start disconnecting everything up there, and then we'll get the engine supported, and we'll come down here, start disconnecting the transmission and stuff. All right guys, as you can see, I've got the transmission out. When you do take it out, make sure you're very careful with the converter. You don't want it to fall out. If it falls out, you could damage the seal inside there or any of the engagement teeth for the pump, and you can damage the transmission. You get it all back together just to find out the transmission doesn't work at all. So be very careful with that when you take it out. Probably a good idea to, if you have something, put it across, just to hold pressure on the converter while you're doing your repairs so the converter doesn't fall out. But now that I have that out, now I have access here to the back of the engine. Obviously, to get to the rear main seal, I'm going to have to remove the flex plate. I'm going to take off the spacer shield in between here. just so I don't have to worry about it falling on me, and then I'll have access to the flange where the oil seal is. So let me get this stuff off here and I'll show you guys the next step. I know it might be a little hard to see here. I do have leak dye in here, but it probably won't show up on camera. But I could see a nice big puddle of oil sitting right here. Just looking at the seal on the crankshaft end though, I don't see like the seal is blown out or anything. But you know, it's an obvious oil leak here. So our next steps are, I'm going to remove the Torx bolts here to get this guy out. And then we're going to make sure that the end of the crank here is good. We're going to clean all the surfaces really well. There is a bead of silicone sealant here. I will give you guys that description part number in. I will give you guys that part number in the description below. But basically from here, get these bolts off, get the seal off, and then we're going to clean this all up and get it ready for the new seal. So I'm going to start doing that right now. All right, so this plate here is part of the seal. So I'm not worried about damaging it, but what I am going to do is I'm going to pry off of this to get this off. Just be careful on the engine block and the upper oil pan. You don't want to put any gouges in there that are going to cause leaks. But we're just going to pry this off, get it out of the way. All right, guys. So this is the PTFE seal here, and I don't know what's on this. I don't know if... Oh, it feels weird. It feels like somebody actually may have stuck silicone on there or something, but it's got some rough spots, and it's no wonder where why this thing was leaking. Other than that, I don't see any tears in it. This area here is a little rough, but overall it looks okay. But like I said, obviously it's leaking, so we're going to replace this with a more updated aftermarket version of this seal. This is what we're going to be replacing it with. This is a nice piece from 034 Motorsports. If you guys are not familiar with them, they make a lot of aftermarket parts, performance parts generally for Volkswagen, Audis, Porsches, you know, a lot of European vehicles. That is the part number on it. But this is basically a billet flange with sort of, I don't want to call it old-fashioned, but a more traditional oil seal. This is a lip oil seal that has basically, I don't know if you can see it in there, but a spring tension on it. It does also come with the installation tool, which will go over the crankshaft, so you don't have to worry about ripping the seal when you're putting it in. Just to point out, if you are installing a factory-style PTFE seal, again, I don't see anything wrong with these. As long as they're installed properly. You do need the proper installation tool to install this. This seal needs to face towards the engine. If it rolls backwards when you're trying to install it, it will leak. You can damage it, and obviously it's a lot of work just to get to this. If this is leaking, you'll get a vacuum leak. Your engine will run poorly. You'll get misfire faults. It's you know, it's worth taking your time here and getting the installation tool when you install it. But obviously from here, now I need to clean my silicone off of my engine block here, and I'll get it all ready to install the new ones. You know, I get a lot of requests to see what the service manual looks like and what needs to be done. So this is just a quick overview here, showing, you know, once you got the transmission out, the removal of that plate. There's the numbering for the bolts. If you take yours off and you're alarmed that you see 2 threaded holes with no bolts there, this is normal, just to make you guys aware of it. This is talking about the sealant that you need, basically cleaning off the surface. I mean, this is pretty self-explanatory stuff. You know, if you want a good sealing surface, you need to make sure everything is nice and clean, no oil, nothing like that. This is showing the silicone bead that you need to apply no more than 2 to 3 millimeters thick. You know, I say this all the time, but you really don't need much more than that. These are machined surfaces. If you have too much, it's going to squeeze both out of the sealing flange as well as into the crankcase. And if that comes dislodged, it's going to be pulled into the oil pump screen and you'll clog the screen and have low oil pressure. So stick to that 2 to 3 millimeters. This here is showing that PTF seal and how it needs, the lip needs to face in towards the engine to prevent oil leaks. You know, it's just a picture description showing those two. And then these are the special tools that you need to install it. Again, a lot of the quality oil seal kits will come with some sort of plastic tool where you can use so you can get over the crankcase without damaging the seal itself when you're pushing it over. But you know, this is just using the factory tools. The bolts to install there, let's see, tightening sequence. Here we go. So hand tighten bolts 1 through 6, and then all the bolts 1 through 6 get tightened down to 9 Newton meters, which is about 79 inch-pounds. But it's really just that simple. Here it's just showing reinstalling that intermediate plate there. So what I've got going on here now is I've got my sealing surfaces all nice and clean. They are dry. There is no oil, anything. I use brake clean to clean this all up nice and dry. There is some staining on here. I'm not really worried about that so much. The new seal will take up that slack. All my bolt holes are clean and I blew them out dry. I like to put blue Loctite on these so I know they're not going to vibrate loose and cause any issues. Same goes for the crankshaft bolts here. Clean these out really well, blow them out because it is a good practice to put some kind of thread sealer on these as well. They do go into this oil passageway too, so you can get oil seepage coming out of these bolts that can cause an issue. So you might want to put some thread sealant on these as well. But from here, I'm going to apply my silicone bead and get that new seal installed. All right, so as you can see, I've got my intermediate plate back on. I've got my flex plate, or drive plate as Volkswagen calls it. I put thread sealant Loctite, I don't know exactly what it's called, but bolt sealant in here because, like I said, these do go into an oil passage, or not necessarily an oil passage, but they go into the oiling system of the engine. You don't want these to weep out oil. But there is no precise sequence to tighten these down. Just do a crisscross pattern. The torque spec is 60 Newton meters and then an additional 90 turns on these bolts. But from this point on, that is basically everything you need to know to replace the rear main seal on your 1.8 liter Gen 3 engine. Obviously from here, I got to reinstall the transmission, all my electrical connections, the drive shafts. It's also a good idea to do your oil change right away, since you were scraping debris on there. You want it to get out. Any brake clean, anything, all those contaminants could have gotten into the engine. You want to flush them out now. So I'm going to get this transmission back in. I'm going to fire it up, make sure there's no codes, and then send it down the road. Yeah.